Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to MangoTown Plaza for this week's variant on board games. We're going to be playing Kauri, which is a variation on Mancala. MangoTownMatt, MangoTownTravis is also here, and we are going to get started. Sorry for a bit of the brightness. I'll see if I can move a little bit over on this way. Ooh. All right. Man, I guess we will go ahead and get started. Now, I actually, in preparation for this week, was able to find almost nowhere on the internet that I was able to play or practice Kauri. From what I understand, and this is probably important for Travis as well before we get started, the idea is that you're trying to move the various blue seeds, and I think the red seeds you cannot move, but you can move the blue seeds around and into in a counterclockwise fashion. So I really I'm not entirely sure. We are going to find out. I don't know that I did anything. Okay, there we go. Now, I have brief memories from being a child where played Mancala, but honestly, I really don't. If we were playing Mancala, I would have no idea what I was doing. So a little bit of history about Kauri, as it is simply a variation of Mancala. Was created in Germany, I believe in 2008, maybe a little bit earlier than that. People seem to really dislike it, from what I've read. And based on the lack of explanation that I was able to find, it's understandable that they would feel that way. So the general rules are as such. Initially, there are 6 counters in each hole, 5 seeds, and 1 cowrie. When it's the player's turn, each hole must contain 1 cowrie, which apparently isn't true because we've already moved some of the cowrie. He distributes the seeds first, one by one, in the anti-clockwise direction. Yeah, so I mean, like, even the directions that I'm reading don't make a whole lot of sense. And we're just going to see what happens. Hopefully we'll be able to find out what exactly we do. However, having read some strategy on the game itself, not being in the lead in the beginning is to my benefit, so maybe it is, maybe it isn't. What's great about Kauri is that if you do have a Mancala board, you could play on a standard Mancala board. Or if you don't have a Mancala board, you could always like dig in the dirt, draw circles on the back of a placemat. Lots of options. Okay, so me and Travis and I are in the same exact boat. So we'll try to keep the banter entertaining this week. I've been reading this really interesting declassified CIA document. I don't know if it was classified. I'm assuming it's classified. It comes from the CIA reading library on the internet. And one thing that is really interesting to me about this document that I was surprised by, I was not expecting. To find this is that the CIA actually did, I don't know if I would call it research necessarily, into a combination of different techniques, which I'll talk more about in a moment, that all relate to more or less out-of-body experiences and the relation to the universe. I believe that the actual, let me pull it up. I have it here somewhere. Maybe I don't. There's some program that you can where you can get the tapes, and it does stuff. It uses like transcendental meditation. It uses like some vocalization, humming certain tones, and basically the idea is that it looks at all of this. The reason I was reading it, the reason that I was particularly interested in it, is that it focuses on consciousness from a very scientific perspective. In as scientific as it could be when it was written, which I'm not sure when it was written exactly, but I know that it was released in the early 2000s. Now, they talk about consciousness a lot as consciousness essentially as energy, and they talk a lot about wavelengths. Excuse me. Because, of course, all matter is to some degree energy, and if you look into any quantum theory, if you're familiar with quantum physics and whatnot, that will become a little more obvious. But what's interesting is that they talk about essentially what consciousness is as energy, and also how that relates to like the universe as energy, all in relation to these sort of out-of-body experiences where I guess more or less they do a lot of talking about hemispheres of the brain. And obviously if this were to be rewritten and reinvestigated, they would probably come up with a very different model for this. But they talk a lot about left brain hemisphere, right brain hemisphere. But they also talk about it in relation to the universe, and how if you look at the Big Bang Theory and some of the literature that exists on it, it's almost as if you could look at the universe as an egg, where you have two halves that kind of form this egg shape, where on one end you have a white hole, and on the other end you have a black hole, spiral into each other, but all of the creation goes out and around and comes back in. And we would be, if this is the egg, we would be like here, pretty new in the term of things. But So it's interesting. That was really interesting to me just because of the mimicry that you see there. But so basically, the suggestion is that there was a scientist that this guy references a lot who came up with a measurement for what a frequency would look like if you were to get into kind of like the vibration of the universe. It's like 10 to the negative 33rd, something along those lines. Keep in mind that I'm not versed in the sciences as much as I probably should be to be reading something like this. But most of it has been pretty understandable. And so essentially, you have like a range where you have a thin line up top and a much larger line in the middle and a thin line down at the bottom. And the metaphor they give is that it's kind of like the ocean, where if you're up top where the waves are, you're kind of in that middle portion. But once you get way, way down to the bottom, you can't really notice that there's any motion, and you kind of get into those upper ranges. And so it talks a lot about focusing energy and how if you're able to focus your conscious energy hard enough, like if you're just like, obviously I hyperbolize for comedic effect, but if you're able to focus your energy, you can, and if you're able to get up into these frequency ranges where it almost becomes a line, where it would be so fast that your focus would just be like laser sharp, then you're able to have not only an out-of-body experience, but also like the suggestion is that you're interacting with the universe and allowing your mind to kind of explore various areas. And they talk a lot about the various planes, various 2D, 3D, 4D models. Really interesting. Probably not the most interesting for a lot of you, but it's blowing my mind. Just because it's a completely different, it's a very scientific look at consciousness. Consciousness. Second, because it's a very different way to approach the idea of us as individuals. They talk a lot about holograms too, which I think is kind of why I ended up there originally. If you think about kind of life, all life is as like a computer simulation, is kind of sort of a hologram to some extent. So if you're able to do that, if you're interested at all in the notion of life and consciousness as a projection, as a simulation, then that's where this document gets really interesting. Because basically the suggestion is that when you're able to focus this energy, when you're able to have an out-of-body experience, what you're doing is creating creating a hologram. And they talk a lot about holograms as sort of, now not holograms like the optical illusions where you put the square down in the bowl that's a mirror and you're able to see it up front, but holograms, the example they give is if you have a bowl full of water and you drop stones down into it and you flash freeze it as the stones are dropping in. You have ripples up top, you have the stones kind of halfway down. If you were to like super shine lasers through that, it would create a hologram. Think about kind of the way that R2-D2 does it in the very first Star Wars movie, the fourth, for those of you who are really concerned with the canon. Um, so they talk a lot about that as kind of the purest form of energy, where there's so much energy. That's kind of where they get into the physics, properties of matter and whatnot. Yeah, check it out. It's quite a read. It looks like Travis is winning, though I'm still not sure exactly what the general technique would be. Snow finally melted here. Oof. Thank goodness, and it's only supposed to get warmer. I cannot wait for spring. I don't particularly mind winter. But I'll tell you what, I would rather be doing literally anything else than existing somewhere where it's just cold. Now, if I were to live somewhere like right next to a lake where I could like cut a hole in the lake and jump in and be like, whoo, that'd be a different story, but not the case. One thing that's been interesting today, I Skyped with a friend who used to be a coworker. He moved back to New Zealand. We taught together last year. And so we were talking, we were Skyping over the weekend, and he said, oh, well, you know, send me some of your poems. I work on poems every single day. I get up and write for about an hour. It's like the first thing I do. It's nice because then you've already achieved something by the time most people wake up. And you just try not to think too much about the fact that art is human garbage. Trash for the human soul. And so I put together a bunch of poems. I tried to pull kind of from stuff I've done more recently. And so I put together 25, 26 pages of it. And earlier in the year, I applied for MFA programs, Masters of Fine Arts programs. You know, spend some time doing nothing but writing and studying poetry. And I'm sitting here with this big document of what feasibly I could have turned in. Now, these are all poems I wrote after having applied. These are all poems I've written just in September. And I was just like, man, I wish I had all of these back then. Likely because I would have included some of them. So now it's getting interesting. So Travis currently has 20. I know that you guys can't see it perfectly. Let me see if I can move myself over a little bit. No. Yeah, so Travis has 20, I have 18 right now, and I have 18 because of this last move that I made. So I guess we're getting to the back end where it really does start to become, more beneficial not to have one at the very beginning. Oh man. Now, as you'll notice when I hover over the different shelves, you have 2 and 1, 1 plus 0, 4 plus 1. And I think that generally, understandably has to do with where the pieces go. So even though we aren't fully able to know how we're playing this game, we can have some idea of technique. Like I know that if I do this move right here, Travis gets 1. So why would I do that? Kind of looking at your options, figuring out what is the best. Fortunately, it looks like no matter what I do, Travis still ends up with 1. Ah, okay, there we go. A feasible option. I hope we get to play at least one more game of this. Ooh, I also got a. So I think a lot of, in terms of diet, I think a lot about gut health. Things you put in to kind of help the bacteria in your gut microbiome flourish. Well, I mean, it makes sense when you think about it. The studies, the research, all of the science, it's kind of just starting to emerge. We haven't seen too much of it because it is such a recent consideration. But kombucha, now I only learned this recently. A lot of the probiotics, prebiotics that you could take, any of the, man, a lot of the combinations that you could take are, sure, they're good, but they really only tend to provide maybe 1, 2 types of pre or probiotics. Maybe, I mean, sure, sometimes you might get 4. But I'm not sure that I've ever seen one with more than 4, however. No, I've never taken them. I just try to get them from natural sources. Garlic, onion, 2 great ones. And if you eat them enough, you won't stink all the time. It's great. I actually learned recently that kombucha is a great, not surprisingly, kombucha is a great source of probiotic for your gut. Because when you ferment it, it is technically a sort of wild fermentation. You aren't not necessarily letting wild yeast ferment as you would maybe with, say, a sour beer, or but you are using a SCOBY. And I heard one of my students in the hall the other day say, "Oh well, I was gonna let you try some of my fermented tea." So I stopped her and I was like, "What?" Because where I'm living right now, I have not been able to find kombucha, and I haven't really gone out of my way to try and find it too much, really, because I don't think that I would be able to. I mean, the places that I've looked, I mean, there's not anything that I've been able to find. And So I asked her, I was like, well, I mean, if your family has been making kombucha for a while, could you bring me some SCOBY? And she brought me some SCOBY today. So after this, I went to the store and I already bought a big glass jar. It was full of delicious paprika, delicious peppers. I mean, I emptied it out and I washed it. I'm going to clean it with some vinegar later on. And man, I'm going to be done for. Travis is definitely going to win this, I think. And so I have some SCOBY. I have some of their kombucha. The SCOBY's like sitting in it right now. I have some green tea and some black tea ready to go. I'm going to use kind of the, I'm using what I have on hand at my house. So I have some Turkish black tea, which is a lot more like finely cut than what you would see, say, in Assam or something. Or an English breakfast blend, an Irish blend, anything like that. And I have some genmaisha, so I need to sit down and pick all of the puffed rice out of that. Gonna make some delicious kombucha. I'm hoping it doesn't take too terribly long. We will see. Alright, so I'm starting to figure it out. Kauri, that is. When you have the red ones on their own, they can only move one. When you pair a red and a blue together, it gives you a larger move. The more stones you have in a single cup, the further they can go. So if we look at E on my side, if we look at black E, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 blue stones and 2 red stones. So if at a certain point it doesn't make a ton of sense. I'll give Travis a point or two to see what happens. One of the reasons I'm really excited to make kombucha is because, well, I like to brew things, I like to ferment things, aside from the general benefits of gut health. When I'm at my permanent address, I brew things like beer. I would love to keep bees someday and be able to make some mead, make some wines if I ever have the patience to grow grapes or to get them somewhere and have the disposable income to do so. Kombucha is great because it's a pretty cheap, easy, and sustainable way to make something that's delicious, a little bit different. I like the funk of it. And it has a lot of variability. You can use different types of teas. And one thing that's great is you can do a secondary fermentation, much like you would in beer if you were going to add fruits or a secondary flavoring if you're going to oak it, anything weird, a little bit funky. It's not that weird if you're from Merca, as it's pretty common these days to see of a wide variety. But it's almost cherry season here. Ooh. 2 months, maybe a little more than 2 months, we're going to start having sour cherries regularly. I don't know why the season is so different than it would be in, say, Michigan, where it's really, you have to wait until like July, August to get them. But definitely looking forward to putting some cherries, some sour cherries in there. So it looks like we still have 20 blue stones in play right now. So I'm making up a little bit of lag behind. I have 25 pieces currently. Travis has 30. Apparently there's some other games that are like pretty similar to Kauri, like I think Coffee and maybe one or two other games on IG board games, so we might need to stay away from those in the future. Mainly because, like, honestly, if you didn't tell me that this was Kauri, I don't know that I would know that there was any difference between this and Mancala. It's been so long since I've actually played Mancala. Oh, nice. Great job, Travis. I think we're going to stop there for today. We usually do a 45-minute stream for these games on Wednesdays. It's already been 35 minutes. So that's been Kauri. Hope you enjoyed the banter more than our lack of understanding of how the game works. Hope to see you next week. MangoTown Plaza streams regularly each week. Travis and I usually play chess on Tuesdays that we didn't play last night because I had some meetings. Definitely playing next Tuesday. And you can check in every Wednesday for more fun. Thanks for watching. And as the good old German saying goes, the fattening period is followed by the slaughter. I had lunch right before we played, so I was fattened for the slaughter. Great job, Travis. This is MangoTownMatt. That was MangoTownTravis. This is MangoTown Plaza. See you soon.